And they took both of my daughters.
19-year-old Deja wanted to be a nurse. That's why she was in college. Her sister, 20-year-old Abbaney, was her best friend.
Texas A&M University Commerce, a campus where thousands of students walk to class every day, believing they're in one of the safest places possible.
A cow would move. I mean, if somebody would do something like that, you know what I'm saying? My daughters were fun, uplifting, had plenty of friends, nice folks, you know what I'm saying? They took both of my daughters.
The victims' names were Deja and Abbaney Matz. Their killer was someone the family knew well, someone who had already shown his violent nature, someone who had been arrested just days before.
Because they was just up here, my son had a birthday party, and they was all up here and went back, and this right here happened.
Stay tuned as we reveal everything about this case. But first, let me tell you about two remarkable young women who deserve so much more than the hand they were dealt. Welcome to our channel. Please like this video, share and subscribe to this channel to help raise awareness and spread caution. Let's begin.
University Police Department, this is Kim.
Police did release a 911 call that was made by a student at the college saying there was a bullet hole in her dorm room.
And there's a hole through my wall, and and on the other side directly across, there's a nick in my calendar. So it looks like something was shot through the wall and hit my calendar.
Deja Matz was 19 years old, a freshman at Texas A&M University Commerce, with her entire future ahead of her. She had chosen to study public health, a field dedicated to protecting and improving the lives of others. Her sister Abbaney was 20 years old and facing different challenges. As a young mother to a 2-year-old son, Abbaney was working to build stability and security for her small family. The bond between the sisters was strong, the kind of relationship where they supported each other through life's ups and downs, where family meant everything. On February 2nd, Abbaney had planned to spend the night in her sister's dorm room. This wasn't unusual. Families often visited students on campus, and residence halls had procedures for temporary guests. Abbaney had been issued a temporary key card for her overnight stay, following what seemed like standard protocol. Her 2-year-old son would be with her during the visit. For Abbaney, this was probably a chance to spend quality time with Deja while giving her son an opportunity to see his aunt. For Deja, it meant sharing her college world with a family she loved. The sisters had dealt with trouble before. Abbaney had been in a relationship that turned violent, a situation that had already brought law enforcement into their lives. But they likely believed the worst was behind them, that the systems in place would keep them safe. They were wrong. Instead, their stories would end in a dorm room, victims of violence that multiple institutions had the power to prevent.
We get breaking news tonight that we talked about off the top. An arrest after 2 women are shot and killed at Texas A&M University Commerce. Police have identified them as sisters from Garland, Deja Matz and Abbaney Matz. Abbaney's 2-year-old son was also injured in this. Reporter Aaron Jones with more on the arrest and also spoke to the victim's family today. She is joining us from Garland with what they had to say.
Well, Doug, the university just reported the arrest of 21-year-old Jaquise Smith. He's now facing a capital murder charge. He was arrested in Rockwell. Police tell us that they do not believe that he was a student at Texas A&M Commerce, but rather the ex-boyfriend of Abbaney. We spoke to the family tonight. Obviously, they are heartbroken by this, and tonight just hoping to find some peace.
Jacques Sean Smith was 21 years old, and by February 2020, he had already established a clear pattern of violent behavior. This wasn't a case of someone who snapped or showed violence for the first time. Smith had a documented history that should have sent up red flags to anyone paying attention. He was Abbaney Matz's ex-boyfriend, and their relationship had been marked by the kind of escalating abuse that domestic violence experts recognize as extremely dangerous. The relationship had ended, but Smith hadn't accepted that reality. Instead of respecting Abbaney's decision to move on, he had continued to pursue and harass her. The harassment had escalated to physical violence. Just days before the murder's days, Smith had been arrested for assaulting Abbaney. This wasn't a minor altercation or a misunderstanding. This was serious enough that law enforcement had taken him into custody, serious enough that charges were filed.
Yeah, Brian and Christy, he told me what you see on TV is just not how this works in Texas. The judge doesn't always have the full picture when setting bond amounts, but we now know the full picture. In April 2016, Smith pleaded guilty to participating in a robbery, but the charge was reduced and he was sentenced to 5 years deferred adjudication. And then in January of 2018, Smith was sentenced in connection to another robbery to 5 years of community supervision or probation. That means when Smith was arrested for aggravated assault on Abbaney Matz 1 week before her murder, he was likely in violation of that probation. But it's also likely the judge didn't know that.
He had just physically assaulted his ex-girlfriend. He had a history of violence. Domestic violence cases have notoriously high rates of escalation, with ex-partners being at the highest risk of lethal violence. Experts in domestic violence know that the period immediately after a victim leaves an abusive relationship is the most dangerous time. Yet someone, a judge, a magistrate, or other court official, looked at the situation and decided that $15,000 was sufficient to ensure public safety. Smith's release created a deadly window of opportunity. Instead of being held in custody where he couldn't harm anyone, he was free to move around the community, free to plan, free to access weapons, free to continue his pursuit of a woman who had already suffered violence at his hands. The bond system had one job in this case: to protect the public, particularly Abbaney, from a demonstrably dangerous individual. It failed completely, with consequences that would prove fatal within days. But Smith's release was only the first failure. The next one would occur when he decided to take his violence to a place that should have been completely secure: a college dormitory.
Tonight, a campus shooting shattering the calm of a normal school day in Commerce, Texas.
Responding about possible gunshot with an injured baby.
Police confirming a 2-year-old child is one of the victims following gunfire at a freshman dorm.
Officers responded and found 2 deceased adult females in a room.
The child now in stable condition. Authorities wouldn't comment on a possible motive, and other key questions are still unanswered. Why was the child in the dorm room? How was the 2-year-old related to those women? And where is the suspect now? Law enforcement officials familiar with the investigation telling NBC News those involved in the shooting knew each other and have zeroed in on an apartment connected to the suspect. The campus shooting coming mere months after 2 young men were killed in October and a dozen people injured after a shooting at a non-sanctioned party 15 minutes from campus during homecoming weekend left hundreds scrambling to safety.
Smith gained access to Pride Rock Residence Hall by using Abbaney's temporary key card, the same card that had been issued to her for her overnight stay as Deja's guest. This represents a critical security loophole that should never have existed. Residence hall access controls are designed to keep unauthorized people out while allowing residents and their approved guests convenient entry. The system is supposed to track who has access and ensure that temporary access is properly managed. But somehow, Smith had gotten hold of Abbaney's key card. Whether he took it from her by force, found it, or obtained it through deception doesn't change the fundamental security failure. A violent man with a history of assaulting one of the people inside the building was able to walk to the front door using the building's own security system. Once inside Pride Rock Residence Hall, Smith made his way to Deja's room. The sisters and Abbaney's young son were inside, probably feeling as safe as anyone has a right to feel in their own living space. The door was closed. They were surrounded by other students, resident advisors, and campus security measures. None of it mattered. Smith opened fire inside the dorm room. Both sisters were shot and killed. Abbaney died trying to protect the life she had brought into the world. Deja died in the space where she was supposed to be learning and growing, surrounded by her books and belongings and dreams for the future. Abbaney's 2-year-old son was also shot during the attack, but survived. A toddler who should have been playing with toys or watching cartoons became a gunshot victim, injured in the same violence that killed his mother and aunt.
19-year-old Deja wanted to be a nurse. That's why she was in college. Her sister, 20-year-old Abbaney, was her best friend. The two died together in Deja's dorm room Monday afternoon. Abbaney's 2-year-old son, Alan, was shot in the leg. He survived. The family wanted us to show video of baby Alan so people could see just how cruel the person who did this really is.
I think it was like a coward move. I mean, somebody would do something like that, you know what I'm saying? My daughters were fun, uplifting, had plenty of friends, nice folks, you know what I'm saying? They took both of my daughters.
The sound of gunshots in Pride Rock Residence Hall shattered the morning calm. Other students heard the shots and called for help. Within minutes, the peaceful campus atmosphere had transformed into chaos as law enforcement and emergency medical services responded to reports of an active shooter situation. What do you think should happen when someone with a history of violence gets arrested? Should bond amounts be higher, or should some people be held without bond entirely? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Campus police and local law enforcement swarmed the area. The building was secured, and a campus-wide lockdown was initiated as authorities tried to determine whether the shooter was still on the premises and whether other students were in immediate danger. Emergency medical personnel rushed to the scene, but was too late for Deja and Abbaney. Both sisters were pronounced dead. The 2-year-old was rushed to the hospital, where doctors worked to save his life and treat his injuries. By the time investigators arrived at the crime scene, Smith had fled. He had accomplished what he apparently came to do, destroy the lives of people who had tried to escape his violence, and had disappeared back into the community. The manhunt for Jacques Smith began immediately, but he had already had time to put distance between himself and the scene of his crimes. Meanwhile, 2 families were receiving the worst news possible, and a campus community was trying to process the fact that their safe space had been violated in the most horrific way. The bullets that Smith fired in that dorm room didn't just kill 2 young women. They shattered the sense of security that every student should feel in a residence hall, demonstrated the deadly consequences of system failures, and left a 2-year-old child to grow up without his mother. The lockdown notification reached students through emergency alert systems, text messages, emails, and announcements that no one ever wants to receive. Shelter in place. Armed subject on campus. Avoid the area. For thousands of students, faculty, and staff, a normal Tuesday had just become a nightmare. In residence halls across campus, students barricaded themselves in their rooms, turning off lights and staying away from windows. Many were texting frantically with family members, trying to let loved ones know they were safe while simultaneously trying to get information about what was happening. The Pride Rock Residence Hall became the center of a massive law enforcement response. Campus police, local sheriff's deputies, and state investigators converged on the building. Emergency vehicles lined the streets as paramedics and other first responders prepared for the worst-case scenarios. Students who lived in Pride Rock were evacuated while crime scene investigators processed Deja's room and surrounding areas. Many of these students had heard the gunshots that killed the Matt sisters. Some had called 911. Others had hidden in their rooms, not knowing if the shooter was still in the building or if they would be next.
The 911 call that was made by a student at the college saying there was a bullet hole in her dorm room.
And there's a hole through my wall, and on the other side directly across, there's a nick in my calendar. So it looks like something was shot through the wall and hit my calendar.
Meanwhile, law enforcement was working to determine Smith's whereabouts and ensure he couldn't harm anyone else. The investigation revealed that this wasn't a random shooting or a case of campus violence by a student or employee. This was targeted domestic violence that had spilled onto the campus, bringing danger to a place specifically designed to be safe. The lockdown lasted for hours as investigators processed the scene and tried to locate Smith. During this time, counselors and support staff began reaching out to students who might need help processing what had happened. Resident advisors worked to account for all students and provide support to those who were traumatized by the events. The investigation into the murders was just beginning, but one thing was already clear. This tragedy could have been prevented. The systems that failed weren't obscure or complicated. They were basic protections that students, parents, and community members had every right to expect would work. Smith remained at large for nearly 24 hours after the shooting, but law enforcement eventually tracked him down. When he was arrested the following day, he was charged with capital murder, the most serious criminal charge available under Texas law. But his arrest couldn't bring back Deja and Abbaney Matts. It couldn't heal their nephew's injuries or trauma. It couldn't restore the sense of safety that had been lost. And it couldn't answer the most important question. How had so many systems failed so completely that 2 preventable murders had been allowed to occur? The first failure occurred in the criminal justice system's handling of domestic violence. When Jock Smith was arrested for assaulting Abbaney just days before the murders, every alarm bell should have been ringing. Domestic violence experts know that the most dangerous time for victims is when they try to leave their abusers or immediately after arrests for domestic violence. Yet despite this knowledge, despite Smith's history of violence, despite the specific danger to Abbaney, the court system released him on a $15,000 bond. This decision ignored established best practices for domestic violence cases. It failed to consider the elevated risk to the victim. Most critically, it prioritized the defendant's freedom over public safety. The second major failure occurred in campus security protocols at Pride Rock Residence Hall. Residence Hall access controls exist for one primary purpose: to keep unauthorized people out while allowing authorized residents and guests convenient access. Smith's ability to enter the building using Abbaney's temporary key card represents a fundamental breach of these security measures. Whether he obtained the card through force, theft, or deception, the fact remains that the building's own security system enabled a violent criminal to access a space where his victims had every right to feel safe. The third failure was in threat assessment and information sharing. Multiple institutions, law enforcement, the courts, and university security had pieces of information that, when combined, painted a clear picture of danger. Smith had a history of violence. He had just been arrested for assaulting his ex-girlfriend. His ex-girlfriend was staying on campus with her sister. Modern threat assessment protocols exist precisely to prevent these communication failures. When someone poses a credible threat to individuals in specific locations, like a university campus, that information should trigger protective measures. Warning systems should activate. Security should be enhanced. Potential victims should be alerted. None of this happened in the Matts case. The systems that existed to prevent exactly this type of tragedy operated in isolation from each other, creating gaps that Smith was able to exploit with fatal consequences. The fourth failure was in domestic violence protection more broadly. Abbaney Matts had already been the victim of assault by the same man who would kill her. She had engaged with the criminal justice system. Charges had been filed, yet she remained vulnerable to continued violence with no apparent additional protection. Smith's release from custody gave him the opportunity. The security loophole gave him access. The lack of threat assessment gave him the element of surprise. The absence of additional protection left his victims vulnerable. Remove any one of these failures, and Deja and Abbaney Matts would likely still be alive today. The deaths of Deja and Abbaney Matts represent more than a single tragic incident. They illuminate critical weaknesses in the systems we rely on to protect vulnerable people from violence, and they offer important lessons that could prevent similar tragedies in the future. Understanding domestic violence patterns is essential for everyone, not just law enforcement or social workers, but friends, family members, co-workers, and community members who might be in a position to recognize warning signs or offer support to victims. Students should be aware of security protocols in their residence halls and feel empowered to report security concerns or suspicious activity. They should know who to contact if they feel unsafe and understand what resources are available to them. Universities have responsibilities that extend beyond providing education. When students live in campus housing, institutions become responsible for their physical safety and security. This includes maintaining effective access controls, training staff to recognize and respond to threats, and establishing clear communication protocols with law enforcement. Most importantly, we can honor the memory of victims like Deja and Abbaney Matts by refusing to accept that these deaths were inevitable. They weren't random acts of violence or unforeseeable tragedies. They were the predictable result of system failures that can and should be corrected. Deja Matts chose to study public health because she wanted to protect and improve lives. Her death, along with her sisters, should motivate all of us to examine the systems that failed them and work to ensure that other families don't experience similar losses.
And they took both of my daughters.
19-year-old Deja wanted to be a nurse. That's why she was in college. Her sister, 20-year-old Abbaney, was her best friend. The two died together in Deja's dorm room Monday afternoon. Abbaney's 2-year-old son, Alan, was shot in the leg. He survived. The family wanted us to show video of baby Alan so people could see just how cruel the person who did this really is.
I think it was like a coward move. I mean, somebody would do something like that, you know what I'm saying? My daughters were fun, uplifting, had plenty of friends, nice folks, you know what I'm saying? They took both of my daughters.
Abbaney did not attend the college. She drove her sister back to school after a big family get-together over the weekend. She and baby Alan were only going to spend one night there.
Because they was just up here. My son had a birthday party, and they was all up here and went back, and this right here happened.
The girl's family says there had been relationship issues, but for now, they want the focus to be on these two beautiful sisters who were full of life and love.
It was just my little booze, my booze.
In Garland, I'm Rebecca Lopez.
The Matt sisters deserve better from every system that touched their lives. Their deaths should serve as a catalyst for the changes needed to protect other vulnerable people from preventable violence. Every person deserves to feel safe in their home, on their campus, and in their community. Achieving that safety requires all of us to do better, to recognize warning signs, support victims, hold institutions accountable, and refuse to accept preventable tragedies as inevitable. Following his arrest, Jacques Smith was charged with capital murder for the deaths of Deja and Abbaney Matz. Capital murder is the most serious criminal charge available under Texas law, reserved for the most heinous crimes and carrying the possibility of the death penalty or life imprisonment without parole. The charges reflected the severity of Smith's crimes, the deliberate murder of 2 young women, the attempted murder of a 2-year-old child, and the use of a deadly weapon in the commission of these offenses. The case against Smith was strong, built on physical evidence, witness testimony, and his documented history of violence against one of the victims. But criminal charges against the perpetrator, while necessary for justice, couldn't address the systematic failures that enabled the murders to occur in the first place. The Matz family and the campus community needed more than just punishment for Smith. They needed accountability from the institutions that had failed to protect Deja and Abbaney. The family began seeking answers from Texas A&M Commerce about the security protocols that allowed Smith to access Pride Rock Residence Hall. They wanted to understand how a violent criminal had been able to walk to the front door of a supposedly secure building using a temporary key card. They pressed for transparency about campus security measures, demanding to know what steps the university was taking to prevent similar breaches in the future. These weren't unreasonable requests from a grieving family. They were essential questions about institutional accountability and student safety. Students and parents wanted assurance that the security loophole exploited by Smith had been closed and that additional protections were in place. Which part of the story shocked you the most? The bond system failure that released a violent man days before he killed? The security loophole that let him walk right to the front door? Or the fact that multiple institutions failed to communicate and coordinate to protect these sisters? Hit that like button if you believe we need better protection for domestic violence victims and stronger campus security measures. Subscribe for more stories that expose system failures and demand accountability from the institutions we trust with our lives. The deaths of Deja and Abbaney Matz cannot be undone, but their legacy can include the changes needed to protect other potential victims. Their story serves as a stark reminder that institutional failures have real consequences and that the price of those failures is measured in human lives. Justice for the Matz sisters means ensuring that their deaths were not in vain, that the systems that failed them are reformed, that other families are spared similar losses, and that the promise of safety in places like college campuses is backed up by effective policies and procedures. The fight for this broader justice continues, carried forward by family members who refuse to let their loved ones be forgotten and by community members who demand better from the institutions that are supposed to protect us all. Remember Deja Matz, who wanted to dedicate her life to public health and protecting others. Remember Abbaney Matz, who was trying to build a better life for her son. And remember that their deaths were preventable, a fact that should motivate all of us to demand the changes necessary to prevent similar tragedies in the future.